Recording is started. There we go. Okay, right. Thank you. Well, look, good afternoon to all of you from so many different schools across the hub. I know some of you I've met before, some of you I don't know. So if you haven't met me before, I'm Gareth Dace. I am the Careers Hub Strategic Lead. So I'm employed by Hertfordshire LEP, and it's the team of coordinators that you will know will be slightly more familiar with. So Steve, who's our Operations Hub lead, will cover a bit of this presentation, and then you may also have more day-to-day contacts with Heidi, with Shay, with Chris, with Caitlin, or for those of you working in SEN schools, your new coordinator Alicia, who's joined us this week, is also on the call today as well. So it'll be the coordinators that you know more than me in all likelihood. So today's workshop is just to explain a little bit about this project, which we've informed you about and invited you to be part of previously, and it's to give you a bit more understanding about what this will actually entail for your school and probably for you as the careers leader to try and manage this. So just to give you a bit of background for it, we were approached by the Careers and Enterprise Company in the summer, who in turn had been approached by the Department for Education to trial some projects around the country, around different hubs, around Gatsby Benchmark 6, which for those of you who have been in post for a while will know that is all around providing students with an experience of a workplace. Now, the reason why we were approached was because our Benchmark 6 scores are actually very high. So us and 5 other hub areas around the country have been asked to pilot this scheme, which is aiming to test, well, for those schools and for those hub areas where they've got high Benchmark 6 attainment, what can we do to try and get that small, I think they call it like the extra third, but I think in our case it's more of an extra fifth of schools to actually fully achieve Benchmark 6. And the idea is that we will test and pilot some ideas. So I really want to emphasize the fact that this is a pilot project. And the idea is that we will come up with some solutions that we will then feed back to the rest of the hub and to the rest of the country. So some of you might be on 100% on Benchmark 6 at the moment. Some of you won't. I'll explain that rationale in a moment. But this project is very much around testing some of those models out. The project runs, it's just throughout the 2023-24 academic year, so it runs up until effectively the end of July. The objectives are twofold. So one is that one that's on the screen there. It is to test new models, and we've been very careful on the wording. We've done it very subtly, and I don't know whether you'd have picked up on this yet, but there is a distinct difference between an experience of the workplace and work experience. So Steve will come on to talk about that, but essentially work experience is an example of an experience of the workplace, but there are other ones. Benchmark 6 is testing experiences of the workplace. So work experience program isn't the be all and end all, the only way of achieving that benchmark. The other objective is that we hope for those of you that aren't achieving Benchmark 6 at the moment or aren't fully achieving it, that some of the provisions that we will do through this pilot program will help your school to improve that score. It may not be, if you're on 10% at the moment, it's unlikely that this project will get you from 10% to 100%, but you might find that some of you go from 50% to 75%. Those of you that are very close on maybe sort of 80% will get to 100%. But I think for you on an individual basis, what we hope this will do as well for you is it will highlight for you just ideas that you might have to embed into your careers programs over in the foreseeable future. The project is a partnership, so we are funded through Careers and Enterprise Company. As with majority of the things that we do through the Careers Hub Bureau, we don't do the direct delivery. We've got fantastic partners within Hertfordshire. So Anna, who you're going to hear from shortly from Amazing Apprenticeships, has led on the research piece that took place in autumn term. And we think some of the findings for that are really valuable, not just for this project, but actually looking beyond that as well. So Anna will share some of that with you very shortly. And then services for young people, who I think most of you will trade with or will have traded with in the past. They are going to be delivering the actual delivery aspect of the project, so they will be managing that, and you'll hear from Gemma and Natalie shortly as well. And I guess equally as importantly, this is a partnership between us and you as schools and us and employers. So we've run a similar session for employers because there's two parts to this. One, it's getting schools on board, but it's also making sure that we've got sufficient employers on board to help run this project. Just so you know, on a macro level, we've got to try and get the best part of 2,000 young people out into an experience of the workplace during this project, and that's a roughly split between initially 50 schools, but I suspect that number will be closer to 30 by the time we actually get going. So just a bit more rationale. Why are some schools involved? Largely, this is all linked to Benchmark 6 scores, and it was Benchmark 6 scores as at July in the summer term when we first got hold of this project. So if you weren't achieving Benchmark 6 in July, which triggered us to respond to you, but based on your last one, you're now at 100%, you can still take part in this project. I mean, there's got to be a cut-off point at some point. So it's based on that previous data. I think we've approached every school that wasn't achieving Benchmark 6. So in some cases, some of you were on 100% on Benchmark 6, but actually when you look into the micro level of it, you've got to 100% by saying that only an overwhelming majority of students will gain an experience of a workplace rather than all of them. So if you're currently thinking, well, I've had 100% for the last 3 years, why am I still on that list? It will just be down to that micro level. Okay, so there'll be an opportunity to ask or to answer, and hopefully for us to answer any questions that you have at the end of the webinar. But I'm going to hand over to Steve now, who's going to give you a bit more context around Benchmark 6 and what it actually means.
Thanks, Gareth. So just to lay out the context of Gatsby Benchmark 6, exactly what Gareth said, we're trying to look at that mind shift change and that kind of terminology change from work experience to experiences of the workplace, which is a bit wider and has more elements to it. Work experience can be part of that, but also work shadowing, workplace visits, tours and talks, 1, 2, 3 day placements rather than being 5-day placements. So we're starting to look at how that can be slightly different approach to that and looked at. We're also thinking about, yes, that can still be year 10 and year 12, where the majority of that tends to happen in Hertfordshire, but we can also step outside of that. So we can look at different year groups and different times of the year, rather than those pinch points at the end of June and the first 2 weeks of July. Again, some of these activities will run then because that's when you're trying to get your students out, but we want to just make you aware that you can look outside of those parameters, and this can be a more flexible approach, different year groups, different times of the year. But in essence, what we're trying to do is get more experiences of the workplace for students before they get to the age of 16. And then also, again, if your school or provider goes out, you go up to year 13, then again, another activity within the sixth form. So yeah, it's all about that wider look at experiences of the workplace, the different types of activities and the different year groups and the different times of year you could do that. Next slide, please, Gareth. So in amongst those kind of activities, we'd like to start thinking about what time of the year, what year group, and maybe which students you might want to get some help with getting out on placement. We know that some students overcoming barriers, so particularly maybe free school meal students, pupil premium students, those care experienced or with special educational needs might be slightly harder to place. So they could be some of the students you're trying to help get out. You might feel that at the moment you get 85, 90% of your students out, and then we can be looking at activities that would be palatable for those students. That's why the shorter, sharper activities might help with that. So a tour and talk where they go out to an employer, maybe in the school minibus, maybe 10 to 12 students with some staff, and go and visit an employer, find out about what that workplace is, what they do there, what kind of opportunities they offer to young people, what an apprenticeship is, meet a few people and have a bit of a chat. That kind of two-way process has got to be part of making this meaningful. It could be inspirational, opening their eyes, or it could be linked to helping them further down the line with things like employability skills. So it could be hints and tips on how to apply to them. It could be work experience debrief and prep. It could be that they're alumni, so they link in with them because of the fact that it's alumni. Or it could still be the 5-day placement, but you're just trying to get it a little bit more meaningful, maybe with some prep and debrief afterwards, or a project or something like that. But we think the majority of this is going to be workplace visits, 1-day shadow, 1-day, 2-day, 3-day placements is probably going to be a big bread and butter part of this. Next slide, please, Gareth. So within your school, you might be thinking about your experience in the workplace and your work experience program, and you might have just inherited it, or you might just be playing a bit of a numbers game. You've got a certain number of students in a year group and you want to try and get them all out. But I also think, particularly at different times of the year, it's worth reflecting and thinking about the aims of your experiences of the workplace. So within this, we want things to be meaningful and we want the students to get the most out of them. So it could be that this opportunity is raising their awareness, raising their aspiration. It could be developing their skills, where sometimes the employer doesn't matter so much if there's skills development within that visit or that experience. And it could also be about engaging disengaged young people. We know sometimes they don't always see the rationale and the reason behind their subjects, or particularly some of their core subjects, but then when it comes to life and why they need them for the workplace and why they need them to help them earn money, sometimes that penny drop moment happens and then they engage or re-engage better or attend better. So this could be around closing the gap, engaging the disengaged. It could be about opportunity and role awareness, skill development, or preparing them for the next step, which could include online recruitment processes, that kind of thing. Next slide, please, Gareth. So along the way, we will try and survey students, and we will also do a few short, with a small group of schools. We're probably looking for some volunteer schools to maybe do some prep and debrief and maybe something around the Hertfordshire Skills Framework. So as well as the experiences themselves, we are looking for a small guinea pig group that might also get involved in some prep and debrief sessions alongside the bigger amount of placements. So that could be that they're thinking about where they are skills wise before they go out on an experience and then reflecting on it when they return, or what are their next steps now that they've been on that placement. Could they be thinking about creating a CV or a LinkedIn profile? Could they be thinking about reaching out to that employer for a longer placement, or maybe applying to their apprenticeship scheme? So lots of different things and lots of different elements that could come from this. That might be my last slide, Gareth. I can't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that is. Thank you. Just before I hand over to Anna, there's just one point I really wanted to emphasize that I may not have said right at the start of it, is that anything that you do through this project shouldn't be to replace anything that you've already got in plan. You've already got planned for the year. So if you've already got planned your work experience program or whatever it is that would encompass experience of the workplace, please don't think this is going to replace it. It is there just to enhance and in addition to. Right, I'm going to hand over to Anna now, because she'll be able to talk you through some of the research that her and her team carried out, which some of you guys may have been directly involved in earlier in the year. So Anna, if you just want to tell me when to skip through the slides, again, I will hand over to you.
Lovely. Will do. Thank you, Gareth, and good afternoon, everyone. I know this is probably a bit different to the kind of work that we're usually involved in at Amazing Apprenticeships, and probably not what you're used to us getting involved in, but we work closely with the Careers Hub, as you know, and this piece of work sat nicely between schools, employers and young people, which is why we got involved. So I'm sure a lot of the findings in this report won't surprise you, actually, and through our conversations with both schools and those who are responsible for coordinating work experience and talking with employers as well, we got some really interesting themes and trends coming out. The piece of work that we conducted was quite focused, as many of you will know if you were part of it. It was during November, where the bulk of the activity happened, and we conducted interviews with both schools and employers, held focus groups, circulated and analysed surveys as well, and pulled all of that together into this final report. The idea was we wanted to do a kind of a snapshot no, not a snapshot, that's the wrong word, isn't it? But like a dip test almost. And yeah, no, to get a snapshot of where we're at as a county. I think there was a bit of a feeling, certainly through the work that was commissioned by the CEC, that things may have changed, attitudes and approaches to work experience may have changed. And what could we learn about that in our county by talking to both schools and to employers as well? So I'll just run through some of the findings, the exec summary. Please don't try and read these slides. This is almost so you can take it away with you. First of all, though, there was no doubt that work experience is really valued by schools and employers. And whether it's schools that offer it just to year 10s or those that offer it to year 10 and 12, schools really value and can see a lot of value in work experience and the skills and the personal development that it can offer students. Similarly, employers really recognise the value to them as organisations as well, being able to connect in with their local community, offer development opportunities for their staff to set up placements. You know, there were loads and loads of benefits that came out. We through our employer survey, we did ask employers if they offered work experience, and for those that didn't, it wasn't that they'd had a negative experience of work experience. Most of them were saying it's just they'd never been asked. So, but there was a sense that if they were asked, they would be willing to get involved. If we move on to the next slide, please, Gareth. And I don't think this will be a surprise to any of you in schools as well, but through talking to those that were responsible for the coordination of work experience across their settings, there was a sense that that focus is often on the coordination itself and trying to get hundreds of students to get secured into placements, whether they are sourcing them themselves, which does seem to be the primary driver for placements. That kind of the first stop for a lot of schools is to say to students, right, you've got this window of time, go and see if you can find your own placement. And then if you can't, if you're struggling, come back to us and we'll then help you. And that all of that resource really, and a lot of that resource will go into that coordination, the paperwork, liaising with parents, trying to get students ready, organising teachers to help with some of those visits. And then some of that energy and resource and capacity, you know, it will be down to all of that. And I understand that sometimes drifts off a bit, and perhaps the focus isn't as heavily on the reflection activities and the impact that that placement has had for the students. This is mirrored by employers as well. So again, with employers, a lot of the energy goes into what are we going to do with those individuals when they're here? Who's going to look after them? How are we going to make this as meaningful as possible? And less reflection activities for employers as well on what would we do differently next time? How could we work differently with the school going forward? Yeah, that's fine. The traditional model of 5-day placements is still the preferred model. So there were very few schools that we spoke to who were doing anything less than 5 days. The only exception really was for students who couldn't sustain that full duration. So for whatever reason, whether it was a health condition, whether it was their own personal situation, that if they weren't able to do the 5, then schools were doing other things with them in those days. So sometimes that felt quite structured, and there may be a project or a work-related learning task. Other schools did say to us, you know, we feel like we're not doing as well as we could do for those students, and we feel like sometimes we're kind of either getting them on placement within the school or an organisation linked to the school, like a nursery or a library, for example, and felt that that is an area of development that we could improve on across the county. Interestingly, both schools and employers could see the benefits of offering shorter placements, so those 1 to 3 day placements. And I hope I can put this diplomatically enough, but there was also a sense from schools that shifting to anything less than 5 days might not be as popular with school timetablers or colleagues, where everyone's kind of got used to managing that 5-day model across the school. And because it's been in place like that, hasn't it, for years and years, as long as I can remember coming through the education system. And actually, what does that look like? But recognising from an employer's point of view, they actually find 5 days really difficult to manage, because for a lot of workplaces now, they're not in the workplace for 5 days. It's really typical that they may be in for 2 or 3, but not 5. And so what the pressures that can then put on employers in having to try and facilitate that. You can kind of see where this disconnect is starting to come in. Okay, next slide, please. I was really, really interested in this point that some schools have started to move their work experience weeks to earlier in the year. So that old story of schools sending out their students in June and July, and employers feeling that pressure because all of the schools in that area do it all at the same time, feels like this has shifted as well. That is the case in some areas, and that pressure is still in that June-July period. But some schools have actually decided to move their placement weeks earlier to February, March, and April. For a couple of reasons, really. A couple of the schools have done this to try and prioritise work experience within the core timetable so that students realise how important it is. They felt that by having it later in the year, in June, July, that perhaps it was seen as a bit of a filler activity or not as important as the rest of the curriculum, and actually had seen real strength in bringing it forward into the year and then being able to do more reflection and impact activities with the students. And for other reasons, including reducing competition with other schools. So again, thinking about that pressure, if you're in an area where there perhaps aren't that many employers and you've got a number of schools all asking for placements in the same week or similar weeks, that can be really hard for businesses to manage, particularly if they're smaller employers. So by shifting it to a different time in the year means that employers are perhaps more likely to say yes and be able to support your school over another school down the road. Most schools set their own dates for work experience. Most employers will react to those weeks, so they'll wait to be asked. There were a few employers who select their own dates and do that totally separately to the school timetable. So interestingly, a couple of the employers that we work with actually look at their capacity. They look at the projects and the pieces of work they've got on in their business. They will then look at who's able to offer work experience, and they will ask those departments to then pick the best dates for them. And that is what gets advertised, and that is what students are able to apply to. And that is totally separate to how schools might be timetabling the opportunities for their year groups as well. So interesting that a couple of employers are taking that approach and just going, do you know what, we can't respond to schools. We're just going to have to do what we need and hope that there's a fit. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of some of the barriers of young people being able to participate and employers being able to offer those placements, we spent quite a lot of time with schools talking about this process of students self-sourcing their own placements, but what that means for less advantaged students. So without a doubt, it came through really strongly for those students who are in households where parents are working and have got those kind of social connections, whether it's through family or friends or the workplace themselves. They are often able to help to facilitate what may appear to be more meaningful, kind of higher profile opportunities. And also kind of where those families are more affluent, if they can support travel costs, then it means that the students can broaden their searches. They can perhaps travel into the cities, they can get into London, they can get into Cambridge. Some students can even complete their placements overseas, depending on the backgrounds of those families. So very different to less advantaged students who can sometimes really struggle to find what schools were calling high quality placements. So they felt that perhaps those students weren't getting the breadth of opportunity that others in their year group might be getting. And this continued theme that sourcing those high quality placements for students with additional needs is a challenge. And again, that won't be a surprise to you, but schools really saying that they felt that for those students with additional needs, that often they may end up in retail and primary schools and care homes, and that there's nothing wrong with that at all, but that they're quite limited in some of the industries and employers that may be able to support with the needs of those students. And I guess that the resources and the capacity to do more work in that space is just so limited in schools. Budget, you won't be surprised, came up time and time and time again. Okay, next one, please. there was quite a lot of feedback from employers that they really would like students to be better prepared by the school or college to help those placements to be more impactful. This was really mixed across the different schools. And again, it came down to resourcing and timetabling. So there were some schools who were able to put quite a large amount of work into some of this preparation for placements, helping students to research the organisation, thinking about the questions they might like to ask, the departments they might like to speak to, the individuals within those departments, even the employability skills that they might like to develop or the personal skills as part of that placement. And then there were other schools who felt that they got really little time on this. At best, they might get one assembly, and that everything else had to be done kind of digitally and hoping that students were picking it up. And employers were really picking that up as well. So you could, employers can see where students have been well prepared, they've made contact with the placement beforehand, they've done their research, they come in, they get a more meaningful experience than those students who arrive and have almost got no idea why they're there or who they're there to see, and they're kind of starting from scratch in trying to then engage the students in those opportunities. So employers certainly felt that they would like to see more in this preparation space. Again, totally understanding that it depends on the resource in the schools. Next slide, please. So there were a number of ideas that came out of this research. Perhaps if we could go to the next slide, Gareth, I think this is a more pictorial way. So there was some stuff that we could do along the top, the kind of practical ideas and activities. And then there was some underpinning work that we felt was coming out, where perhaps if we start with that, when we were bringing groups of individuals together, or where we were able to share some best practice, so perhaps we were interviewing a school and they would mention that they had a particular challenge with something, and then we could give them an example of another school in Hertfordshire that was doing something innovative to overcome that. They really valued that. And similarly, employers, we found, really enjoyed kind of sharing their different approaches and sharing what worked. So we wondered if there was an opportunity to facilitate some of that best practice sharing, to share what works, to help everyone. Some training and guidance for schools and employers focused on the purpose and benefits of work experience. So everyone feels like they're at a different stage. There are some schools and some individuals that we spoke to who have been doing this for years. They've got a really well-oiled machine. They know exactly what they need to do and when they need to do it to make this a success. And there were other individuals that we spoke to who were at the very beginning of their journey. And so perhaps there could be some really easy checklists or guidance that we pull together as a county that might help all schools and employers to get up to speed on how to offer work experience. We also wondered if there could be some training for schools looking to implement work shadowing for the younger year groups. So a lot of schools mentioned to us that this is something that perhaps they had done previously, but had stopped doing because of the pandemic, and were therefore looking to bring it back, particularly because work shadowing, if they're sent out with their parents, can satisfy those issues around health and safety. However, not all students will have parents who are working in roles where they would be able to bring someone in on work shadowing. So that needs a bit more working through. We wondered if there was space to do something around training and guidance for schools on building lasting relationships with local employers. What really struck me was some schools are almost starting from scratch every year. And rather than taking that employer engagement type approach of really working with employers and thinking about the different touch points throughout the year where that relationship could be built, they almost every year were going back to a spreadsheet and having to start again and fill in the gaps of missing employers. Some schools doing it brilliantly, working really well with their alumni employers, so past pupils who have now gone on to set up their own businesses or are in employment in other roles, and had really kind of developed that. So again, I think some of that sharing of best practice. Lots of employers were saying we want lasting relationships. We don't just want a phone call or an email to come through to say, thanks very much for last year, can you do it again? Actually, they would enjoy having a closer relationship with the school and trying to find other ways to engage in activities throughout the year. And we thought there could perhaps be something around enhanced planning and reflection sessions for students to really assist with that impact of the placement. How do we reflect on our work experience placements? And I'm sure all of us can still remember the work experience placements that we had as teenagers, you know, and whether they were good or bad, or if you got some funny stories out of them. But, you know, there is no underestimating the impact, the lasting impact that a good work experience placement can have. Some of the ideas that came out that perhaps could be taken forward as part of the trial is looking at different methods and models. So, for example, could we do more shorter placements? Could we trial some stuff, 1 to 3 day placements, half-day visits for groups, rotational models where groups of students perhaps could move through different employers on different days? Employers were actually saying they would really enjoy that because they potentially get to meet more potential talent. They get to meet more individuals who could be applying for their apprenticeship opportunities. To focus on creating meaningful placements for disadvantaged students. You know, this was flagged, as I said, in a number of the interviews. And so what can we do about it? How can we kind of collaborate across the county to really put some focus in on that? The growth in work shadowing and take your child to work days. So could we help some schools to get up and running with that? That could then link into the guidance. An employer campaign to source placement. So again, this links back to that piece of the early research where employers were saying we've just never been asked. So actually, when was the last time we went out to a fresh group of employers, and do we need a bit of a Hertfordshire campaign to warm more employers up, particularly around sourcing those shorter placements and half-day visits? Now, that could really work well for smaller businesses who are like, I've not got enough for them to do for 3 days or 5 days, but I could take 10 or 15 in a minibus and bring them in and do a really good half day, and that could still have a really good impact. And the development of meaningful work related tasks to support students. So again, thinking about that, if they're not busy for 5 days, if there are 1 or 2 days that need filling, could we create something for the county that could be drawn upon as a resource that helps to have that meaningful activity, rather than again having to think of it each time or find tasks for the students to do in other placements and settings? But could we come up with something as a county that helps them to explore job opportunities and a better understanding of our local economy, something like that? So hopefully that's useful, interesting. Yeah, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So I know some of you were involved in that research piece, and some of you might be hearing this for the first time. I'm sure it resonates with many of you. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions or any thoughts on anything that Anna's just presented there in terms of that research? We'll take more general questions. Oh yeah, Denise, you have.
Hi, yeah, I'm Denise. I work at Queen's School, and it is a problem because we have 270 kids per year group. So it's quite a large amount of students that are having to get a placement for that time. But I'm a year into this role, so I have been looking at a careers programme and changing things and switching things up a bit. But having conversations with teachers, because obviously it affects everyone in the school. Teachers are saying if they have those placements where it's half a day here, 1 day here, 1 day there, that actually affects the timetabling of their particular subject. Because our school's so large, we work on a 2-week timetabling rota. So it's not 1 week and then repeated. So there'd need to be quite a lot of planning, because you couldn't have 10 to 15 kids out of one lesson, but then 10 to 15 kids out of another lesson, because those other 20 kids are going to be taught that topic, but then those other kids have to catch up. So there's a lot of thought that for our school in particular, because we're so large, that would need to go in to facilitate that. And at the moment, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We totally do the work experience placement at the end of July, and everyone gears towards that. They know that 1 week in July is going to be work experience. So the timetabling and their subject topics is geared towards getting that content out before that week.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Denise. And I guess that is the purpose of this pilot. You know, is there something that we could test, or or put in place to try and kind of respond and adapt to some of the, you know, if we've got employers saying, well, this is what I can do, how could we work with a school of your size to try and say, okay, what does that look like? How could it work?
And it might be that we need more form tutors or more heads of year going out to those employers to hear it from the other side. And this is no disrespect to teachers, but I've come from a different industry. I haven't always been in teaching. But I find, like, particularly in our school, we've got quite a lot of people that have done their sixth form, gone to uni, done their teacher training, and then gone straight into a teaching role. So they haven't actually had that outside experience of industry or how other businesses work. And that's great and that's brilliant. Obviously, we need teachers, but they've only had that one tunnel vision of could facilitate teachers to go in and hear it from their side. It might approach, well, three-way if you include the parent and the family, because obviously the families have to agree for them to go into placement as well. But I think we need to look at it from both perspectives.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Sally, you've patiently got your hand up as well.
Hi. On the flip side of that, how likely would it be that employers could accommodate multiple trips over multiple weeks? So, for example, on a Monday, we have a 2-week timetable, but on a Monday of one of the weeks, I'm free periods 4 and 5. So every 2 weeks, I could potentially take a group of students to the same place every 2 weeks. So do you think there would be any scope from some businesses somewhere to maybe not every 2 weeks, maybe every 4 weeks, to accommodate a year group over the whole year to the same place?
Do you know what? I think from the employers that took part in this activity, they'd love to try something new like that and really measure it. Gemma, you might have more insight as well from the employers that you've been working with, but I think potentially.
I have literally just typed that in the chat that I probably will cover that a little bit. We have had some meetings and some things have come up, so I might be able to touch on that at the end.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. If this project runs how we want to, then that's the sort of model and approach that we want to try and trial and test, because clearly it's going to be win-win on both parts. Let me hand over to Natalie, and/or Gemma, who are going to tell you a little bit about operationally what needs to happen now from your perspective to get this going. I know that Judith, got your hand up. If I can just hold your question, Judith, till Natalie and Gemma have spoken, because they may cover it in there, but then I have allocated some time at the back end to answer any questions. So let me hand over to Natalie and Gemma, and then Judith, you will have the first question afterwards. So again, if you just want to tell me when to move through the slides.
Will do. Lovely. Thanks, Gareth. Hello, everybody. Thank you. So we've just got a few slides here. We're going to tag team. So I'll start, then I'll hand over to Gemma, because we're both working on this equally, this project. So we're both from Services for Young People. You might know us individually, you might know us as a service, but for those of you who don't, Services for Young People are part of Herts County Council. We deliver the information, advice and guidance, work-related learning, youth work projects across the county. Both Gemma and myself are project managers in the IAG and work-related learning development team. Kind of we sit centrally within the county. But in previous roles, we were employment and skills coordinators within the area teams. So we were the coordinators of the work experience programmes that you would have, or some of you may have purchased through Services for Young People. I was in the North Herts Stevenage team, and Gemma was the south of the county in Watford, Three Rivers and Hertsmere. So yeah, we're looking at delivering this project, which Gemma will kind of touch on a bit more. But alongside this project, we also work on the ASK programme, which Gemma coordinates, and we also work on the employer liaison element of Hertfordshire Opportunities, which was a project that actually came to close in December. And then myself, I manage the Hop Into Your Future project, which is for neat young people with SEND, looking to get them work experience and move them kind of on through tasters and work experience into paid work. For any of you that want to know more about services for young people, there's a link there for you to find out more. Next slide, please, Gareth. I'm going to hand over to Gemma now. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the kind of next steps of the project and kind of how we're going to kind of bring everything to life, really. I think Steve kind of touched on a lot of what the project involves and what we're kind of hoping to achieve and the kind of experiences we're hoping to carry out. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how we're going to kind of bring that to life, really. So you may have already received a survey when you received the invite, or it will be coming out to you shortly. And there's also a QR code on the next slide that you can use. And that's going to be asking you for a little bit of information, which is probably going to help Natalie and I establish what experiences of the workplace will be best suited to your students. And so really it's going to include questions around what your current school engagement is, so what you're already doing, what's working, capability and capacity to participate. So that's going to be including availability. So I think a lot of people kind of touched on dates and things like that. So we will be asking you for times and dates that you're able to kind of engage with your students, the cohorts that you're looking to engage, and any barriers that you think you might face as a school to kind of getting those students out. So whether that be transport, whether that be timetables, as we've kind of touched on. So any of those things, you get the chance to put all of that information in there, which will obviously help Natalie and I when we're coordinating with the employers and kind of trying to marry up those experiences for you. So I would say the sooner you complete the questionnaire, the sooner we can get things off the ground. We've already had quite a few really promising meetings with employers. So we've had chats with Sky Studios, BAM Construction, to do with their project on the St Albans City Hospital. Sky Studios are starting a new Sky Up programme, which they're going to be piloting. So Natalie and I are going to be working on that with them. We've also talked to Morgan Sindall, Tesco's and PayPoint about doing some collaborative working where I think we touched on this, where students may be able to get to go around to each employer at one location. So yeah, there's some of the things that are kind of coming to fruition. So the sooner you fill out the survey, the sooner we can start marrying you up to activities and experiences for your students. So that's a QR code. So if you want to click on that and filling in the survey, you're more than welcome. So just talking a little bit about what Natalie and I can kind of do to facilitate all of this. So we're going to kind of be doing the coordination and planning. So we're going to kind of be the middleman. Like I say, meeting with the employers, putting together the experiences that they can offer and kind of bringing those to you. But also on the flip side of that, we can actually, if you've got any ideas, if you've got any best practice, or you've got something that you'd really like to do with your students that's not happening and that you haven't got the time to coordinate, but you think we'd really love to go to an employer and do this, then by all means, give us that information and we will try and make that come to life. So we're happy to liaise, happy to take on ideas and kind of, yeah, bring those to life. We can provide templates for pre-experience preparation. So we can talk to you about that, about making sure that your students go to the employer, making sure that they're prepared, what they might need to do. So we can talk about that with you. Guidance on best practice for engaging with employers. So we can we've got lots of information on that. So we're happy to share that as well. And I think this has probably already been touched on a couple of times, but just to kind of reiterate, this is in addition to any kind of offers that you might already have purchased through services for young people, which is obviously who we work for. So it's things that are kind of going to complement your standard work experience. So the things that we kind of talked about with employers already are kind of like taster days, afternoon sessions, morning sessions, like a couple of hours. So things like that, really. And lots more. So yeah, that's the QR code, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, and also, actually, touching on what you said, Denise, just wanted to mention that the conversations that we'd had, for example, with Sky, they are happy to host up to 30 students at a time. So some of the bigger employers can do larger groups. And what they were kind of maybe talking about on their programme is they will have free activities. So one will be a talk, one will be like an immersive experience, one will be talking to a member of staff, and they'll rotate in groups of 10. So that's kind of an example of the kind of thing that you could do, which would kind of address your issue of not wanting to take out smaller numbers from the class. They could do like a whole group. Not saying that all employers will be able to do that, but just wanted to kind of put that out there as something that had come up in conversation.
That would work well.
Or you're frozen.
But if we're looking at them doing it over like multiple weeks, it means for that class teacher, then that wants perhaps another week, but then that possibly could work. I think it's, 10 kids and on timetable for that lesson. So it's, if it was a whole club, yeah.
You keep freezing a little bit, so I've missed a little bit of what you said, but
sorry.
But if you fill out the survey, more than happy to kind of talk to you about things that will work for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done it, and I've given you all the dates, like with mock exams and all the other bits that go with it. I've put all.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Denise, and all those questions that you had there, other people would have been thinking of them as well. So thanks for asking them. Judith, what's you?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting and getting my camera on. I think, or maybe I'm not.
You've unmuted. We can hear you, and we can see you now as well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just want. I mean, it's sort of going back a bit, but something I've been trying to encourage in the school as a way of sort of incorporating experience of the workplace is encouraging subject teachers to take groups of students out on workplace visits that actually fit with their subject. So then that sort of helps with the whole linking their curriculum to careers as well. So, for example, we've taken a group of construction students out to a building site, and they've had a tour and had a chat from quantity surveyors, etc. But I'd like to try and build that in more. So again, that's smaller groups and not necessarily doing it in one great big chunk. But from what we've done so far, that seems to work quite well.
Yeah, thanks, Judith, for sharing that, because I think it's really good to hear that sort of innovation's already taking place, or at least there's something you want to implement across the school, and all these sorts of things are achievable and scalable as well. Just to sort of conclude, or just to summarize some of the things that we've spoken about already, and then there'll be a chance to answer any more questions that you've got. There we go. So next steps, Denise says she's already done it. The QR code on your screen at the moment will take you straight through to the link. It's also on the email that I sent on Monday as well. But so what we'd like you to, even if you're listening to this and thinking, actually, I don't think we can be part of that, the first question there will ask you, do you want your school to take part? And if you tick no there, we'll know to stop corresponding with you about it. But otherwise, if you do want to, if you could just fill that out and then go through that, then Gemma and Natalie and their teams can just try and map this together. Remember, they're doing exactly the same thing with employers as well at the moment. There is scope for innovation. I think Judith's just given you perhaps a really interesting way of looking at this and trying to tackle this. We definitely want to see innovation and creativity. However, you might want to do something that is very, very standard. Those things might exist as well. Again, just to reiterate, anything that you do get through this project is there to be additional to what you're doing and not to replace anything. The team at Services for Young People will manage the process through the matching to the activity. All experiences need to have taken place by the end of the academic year, so it can't take. This was more for the employers than for you as schools. I think it's probably as a given for you guys. And then there will be a survey and evaluation for participating schools to complete pre and post activities as well, which will obviously be coming to you for too. Just one thing I wanted to address is just some of you are potentially thinking, well, how many places are we going to get for our school? And at the moment, I'm going to be disconcertingly vague with that answer by saying I don't know at the moment. As I said, on a macro scale, we've got to try and get about 2,000 students out to experience a workplace in whatever form that might look like. If we've approached you, it's because there were gaps at some point in your benchmark 6 activity. what I would say to you is that, you know, Gemma and Natalie, when they speak to you, there you go. I'm very much passing this over to them and washing my hands of it. Not really. They will give you an idea of the sort of numbers that we've got. I mean, largely will be governed by you. So that's why filling out those surveys is really important. We'll get an idea. Look, you might all fill out those surveys and we might find that there's exactly 2,000 places that you've said you're asking for. It might go one way or it might go the other. So we may come back to you and say, look, could you provide any more? Or actually, this is more than we can offer your school at the moment. If you are thinking about prioritising students, we would ask you to prioritise those who won't systematically receive an experience of a workplace visit. So kind of using Judith's example there, if you found out that the humanities department were fantastic in your school at providing these sorts of opportunities, but actually it's not something that's been embedded within students studying, I don't know, science subjects, then maybe look at those students who don't at the moment gain that, because that may well then have a positive impact on your benchmark 6 scores. We would also ask you to think about prioritising students who may have barriers that prevent them from gaining meaningful experiences of a workplace at the moment. But I think you again will know your schools and your students and where those gaps fit better than we will. So hopefully that survey will allow you to identify some of those. Steve, Sally asked a question and I'm going to hand it over to you to answer in the chat. Again, you just clarify that not for the project, just for general achievement of benchmark 6. Just Steve, do you just want to verbalise your answer that you put in there?
Yeah, so sort of two parts to the answer. So yeah, first of all, for this project, we're not allowed to focus on experiences of the workplace that are virtual. We've been selected to get involved in innovation and getting 2,000 students out, but within that, there's other hubs around the country that have been given like a virtual task, particularly some of the rural hubs. But in answering Gatsby Benchmark 6, an experience of the workplace can be virtual, but it needs to have two-way process and conversations and probably sort of be project based to make it meaningful. And again, as other people have alluded to, myself, Eleanor and others, it needs to have probably a prep and debrief to it to make it meaningful, and for it to probably not be long, sort of short, sharp. I know that Morgan Sindall, for example, have got a virtual element to their offer where that means the young people can meet an apprentice, they can meet a graduate, they can meet a site person virtually just for sort of 20 minutes, half an hour, which can be really meaningful when it's done well, but it's about making it meaningful and the prep and the debrief. So it can be virtual, but for this project, we can't be virtual.
Sure. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts or observations? If you don't want to ask them in front of everyone, we as the team will all stay on once we close the call off. So if you want to stay on and ask those questions, you can do. Equally, I think you've got all of our emails, whether it's directly through to me, your enterprise coordinator Steve, or through to Gemma or Natalie, then you can do so that way as well. Yeah. Okay. Right. I've seen no hands go up, or I can't hear anyone shouting out. So I'm going to assume that is all the questions. So we will all stay on in case you want to ask us something offline. Otherwise, thanks for giving up your time to take part in this session. We are going to send it out to the whole distribution group over the next couple of days as well. So if anything you want to catch up on or see again, you will be able to watch that back. Okay, thanks ever so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.